Tuesday's wreck. Ben was already 10 minutes late, and Gary's glare was a low-grade fever he didn't need. He slammed the door of his beat-up Ford pickup, the dent on the driver's side a permanent reminder of a teenage misjudgment involving a frozen lake and a six-pack. He'd meant to fix it, but something always came up, usually another paying customer's problem. "Morning, sunshine," Gary grumbled, barely looking up from the engine of Mrs. Henderson's Buick. Gary's garage wasn't much to look at, a cinder-block box, baking in the relentless Georgia sun, but it was home. Or at least, the closest thing Ben had to one. "Morning, Gary," Ben mumbled, already heading for his toolbox. The air hung thick and heavy, smelling of motor oil, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of brake dust. Tuesdays were always the worst. He never could figure out why. Doug Miller, ever the optimist, was humming along to the country station on the radio, meticulously cleaning a set of spark plugs. "Benny boy, you're late. Missed all the excitement. Sarah brought in another one of her things." Ben grimaced. Sarah Jenkins, Gary's niece and a part-time art student, often parked herself in the corner of the garage with her sketchbook, a silent observer. Her things usually involved disturbing amounts of charcoal and existential angst. He wasn't in the mood. "What kind of things?" he asked, already knowing he'd regret it. Doug, oblivious to Ben's impending mood, beamed. "Oh, you know. Dark, brooding, something about shadows and reflections. She's got talent, that girl. Just different." Ben just grunted, grabbing a wrench and heading for the back bay where Mr. Peterson's sputtering lawnmower awaited its mechanical savior. He preferred the company of inanimate objects. They didn't judge, didn't ask questions, and mostly just needed a little coaxing to do their job. Sarah sat hunched over her sketchbook, a fragile figure amidst the grease and grime. She was sketching the tow truck parked outside, the rusting hulk looming large on the page. She didn't acknowledge Ben as he passed, her brow furrowed in concentration, a strand of dark hair escaping her messy bun. He noticed she'd sketched something in the margin, a series of repeating triangles. Odd. He tinkered with the lawnmower, the familiar rhythm of the engine a soothing balm to his simmering frustration. The sun beat down on the corrugated metal roof, turning the back bay into a sweltering oven. He was halfway through replacing the carburetor when he heard it. A screech of tires, followed by a sickening crunch of metal. The sound echoed sharply, cutting through the drone of the radio and the clatter of Gary's tools. The intersection of elm and oak was a notorious blind spot. Ben had seen his share of fender benders there. He didn't see the accident itself, the wall of the garage obstructing the view. But he heard it clearly. The initial impact, followed by the shattering of glass and the high-pitched whine of protesting metal. "Probably just some idiot not paying attention," Gary muttered, without missing a beat. He didn't even look up from the Buick. Doug, ever the concerned citizen, peeked out the front. "Sounds nasty. Hope everyone's okay." He returned to his spark plugs, shaking his head. Ben tightened a bolt on the lawnmower, dismissing the crash as another Tuesday annoyance. Accidents happened. People made mistakes. The world kept turning. He just needed to get this lawnmower fixed, collect his paycheck, and get the hell out of this town for the weekend. Maybe head up to the lake, do some fishing. Forget about the grease, the grime. The constant hum of discontent that seemed to vibrate through his bones. He tried to focus, but the sound of the crash lingered in his ears. He could almost picture it, a bright red sedan, crumpled against the side of a delivery truck. The driver's face, contorted in shock. The smell of gasoline and burning rubber. He shook his head, trying to clear the image. He was letting his imagination run wild again. He needed to stay grounded, focus on the task at hand. It was just an accident, nothing more. But as he reached for another wrench, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something about the way the sound lingered, the echo of metal against metal. It was as if the sound itself had a weight, a density that shouldn't have been there. He glanced towards the front of the garage, at the sunlight streaming through the open door. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. He dismissed it as the heat, the lack of sleep, the general Tuesday malaise. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted. A tiny, nagging voice whispered that this was not just another accident. This was something different. Something else. He looked over to Sarah, still sketching intently, but a slight tremor had overtaken her hand. The repeating triangles she had sketched in the margin of the page had increased, becoming chaotic and frantic. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a fear he didn't understand. Then, she quickly averted her gaze, returning to her sketchbook as if trying to hide something. He just stared at her. He wondered if she had heard the crash, or if she was sensing something he had missed. Déjà vu all over again. The metallic shriek was a nauseating echo in Ben's ears. Again, the Cobalt sedan had broadsided his truck, the sudden impact detonating the airbags in a choking white eruption. 8:02 a.m. He fought for focus, the bitter reek of scorched materials assaulting his senses. He anticipated the next note in this grim symphony, the bleeding, unceasing cry of the sedan's jammed horn. He steeled himself against the rush of fight-or-flight hormones, the pointless struggle against the mangled door. He shoved aside the deflated airbag, a dusting of fine powder clinging to his skin. This defied reason. Yesterday had been a fluke. Today felt like a spiteful cosmic prank. He hammered his boot against the warped metal of the door, ignoring the flare of agony in his foot, and finally forced it open. Across the junction, Sarah Jenkins, Gary's niece, stood motionless, a charcoal pad clutched like a shield. She hadn't even attempted to draw. Her gaze, wide and haunted, locked with Ben's. A fleeting spark passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, or simply shared incredulity. The rising keen of sirens grew insistent, closer. Predictable as sunrise. Doug Miller, his firetruck screaming to a halt, was first on the scene. He leaped out, his face creased with concern, his usual hearty nature superseded by sharp professionalism. "Ben, you all right? What in God's name happened?" Doug snapped, his voice tight with worry. He started toward the battered truck, then froze, his eyes transfixed by the twisted metal of the blue sedan. "Hold on. Didn't this just happen?" He swung his gaze between the vehicles and Ben, bewildered. 2 paramedics, a young woman sporting flamingo pink hair and a thick-set man with a walrus mustache, hurried forward. They exchanged a look of utter bewilderment. The woman, Jenna, stitched on her chest, shook her head in disbelief. "This is seriously messed up. We were literally just here." The burly paramedic, his face an unreadable mask, mumbled. "Some serious case of déjà vu, huh?" Ben brushed past Doug, ignoring the questions. He needed confirmation. He strode to the front of the offending car, the mangled chassis glinting in the morning sun. He knelt, wincing at the protest from his back, and scrutinized the license plate. He'd overlooked it yesterday, overwhelmed by the immediate aftermath. Now, he burned the sequence into his memory. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the tableau. A woman strolling her dog, a delivery truck idling at the curb, a newsstand displaying yesterday's headlines. Everything was a carbon copy. "Doug," Ben stated, his voice gravelly. "Run that plate. Call out the numbers and letters." Doug, still visibly off-kilter, complied. "Echo. Victor. 7. 2. Alpha. November." Ben's gut twisted. He shot a look back at Sarah, now sketching furiously, charcoal flying across the page. The emerging image was the intersection, the same vehicles, the same positions, the same everything. "This is beyond déjà vu, Doug," Ben breathed, barely audible. "This is something else entirely." Jenna, the pink-haired paramedic, approached them, her brow furrowed. "Okay, seriously, what is going on? Dispatch is saying we've already been to this accident. They think we're screwing around." "I wish we were." Doug sighed, raking a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I just can't wrap my head around this." Ben stared at the scene, his mind reeling. There had to be a cause, a rational basis. He was a mechanic, a fixer. He could resurrect broken engines, pinpoint hidden malfunctions, construct anything from scratch. But this was outside his realm. Then, he noticed it. A minute discrepancy, a detail previously unnoticed. The shadow cast by the old oak at the corner was subtly altered, elongated, stretching further across the pavement than before. He pointed, his finger trembling slightly. "The shadow, look at the shadow." Lost in the baffling replication, no one seemed to register it. Ben squeezed his eyes shut, desperately trying to silence the cacophony, the sirens, the metallic screech, The rising panic. He needed clarity. He needed answers. He snapped his eyes open, his gaze steely. He would solve this. He had to. Glitches in the matrix. The shriek of tortured steel knife through the still air. A sound Ben detested more acutely than a root canal. Behind the yellow tape, the metallic perfume of burnt rubber assaulted his senses. The same mangled vehicles, fused in a deadly embrace, steamed quietly under the anemic sun. 8:02 a.m. It happened again. He wasn't like the other onlookers. They were stuck too, undoubtedly, yet they persisted with the charade. Coffee runs, banal chatter, strained smiles. Ben had abandoned the pretense long ago, somewhere around iteration 20. Now, he just watched. He needed to decipher the flaw. The fracture in the matrix. This cycle, his gaze lingered on the periphery. The buckled metal, the fractured safety glass identical to all the prior instances. But, hold on. Ben's brow furrowed. Above the wreckage, a street lamp pulsed erratically, strobing against the dull, pre-dawn sky. Yesterday, it had burned steadily. Before that, utter darkness. He logged the anomaly mentally, the first entry in what promised to be an extensive log. The rescue squad extracted the driver from the compact car. Their movements rote and well-practiced. Ben scrutinized their faces, utterly blank. Did they experience it too, this oppressive weight of recurrence? Or were they simply automatons, enacting their designated roles? His attention shifted to the pavement. A newspaper lay discarded amongst a scatter of dead leaves. The blaring headline detailed a local official's transgression, the same stale scandal that had dominated the news cycle for what felt like an eternity. Except something felt amiss. Though the air remained still, the paper stirred. A corner rising and flapping as if caught in an invisible gust. Ben approached, his boots crunching on the shattered asphalt. The newsprint wasn't merely moving, it was eroding. The ink bled outwards, the typeface dissolving into the cheap wood pulp. He reached out, his fingers grazing the decaying edge. He recoiled, a sudden chill prickling his skin. This wasn't merely a loop. It was a cracked record. Events were diverging, unraveling, malfunctioning. Later, back in his cramped apartment, Ben hunched over his workbench, a partially dismantled motor looming. In the dim light. He ignored the project, his concentration solely dedicated to the dogged notebook before him. The cover was unadorned, ebony, almost lost amid the clutter of his desk. Within, he meticulously documented his observations. Iteration 47, streetlight flicker. Pattern, sporadic. Iteration 48, newspaper decay. Progression, acute. Iteration 48, Mrs. Henderson's feline, tabby, replaces calico. That final note was uncharted territory. Mrs. Henderson's cat had been a calico for as far back as he could recall. Now, out of the blue, it was a tabby. A minor alteration, inconsequential to anyone else. But for Ben, it represented another fissure in reality's veneer. He gnawed on his pen cap, the bitter taste anchoring him. He acknowledged the borderline obsession. The perception by others of him as an even greater loner. But he couldn't desist. He had to discern the reason. He had to unearth the pattern, the code to dismantle this waking nightmare. A knock at the door jolted him. He seldom received visitors. He hesitated, his hand instinctively drifting toward the wrench on his bench. Yeah? He called, his voice a low rasp. Ben, it's Sarah, came a soft, tentative voice. Could I have a word? Sarah, the barista from the cafe. She routinely added an extra shot to his espresso, gratis. He experienced a sudden pang, remorse, perhaps, for having disregarded her for so long. He cautiously opened the door just a sliver, peering out at her. Her complexion was ashen, her eyes wide with distress. What's up, Sarah? He asked, his tone more curt than he intended. I saw you, she stammered, clutching a paper cup. At the crash. You were looking at the paper. His muscles tensed. And? I witnessed it too, Ben, the way it was, changing. I questioned my sanity. Her voice quivered. Am I losing it? He gazed at her, his mind reeling. She noticed. She understood. He wasn't alone in this. But the realization brought no comfort, only a deep, abiding dread. If Sarah was perceiving the aberrations as well, then possibly, just possibly, they were propagating. And if they spread far enough, what then? He looked at Sarah, really observed her, and recognized the raw fear etched on her countenance. For the first time since this started, he detected a feeling other than cynicism. A sense of duty, maybe. A compulsion to safeguard. He exhaled heavily, the sound laced with capitulation. Come on in, Sarah, he said, pushing the door wider. I think we have a lot to discuss. The victims. The acrid smell of burned rubber still clung to the air, even as the sky bleached itself anew, the sun climbing towards its appointed position. Another reset. Ben ignored the rising panic in his chest, focusing instead on the victims. He'd been too late before, too stunned. This time, he wouldn't be. He spotted her first. Sarah, Gary's niece. She stood by the curb, sketching furiously in a large notepad. The angle of her wrist, the intense concentration etched on her face. It was all so normal, so tragically unaware. He walked towards her, forcing a casual tone. Nice drawing. What's the subject? Sarah glanced up, her eyes sharp and intelligent. The intersection, she said simply, then returned to her work, shading in the curb with quick, confident strokes. It's about to get messy, Ben blurted, regretting the clumsy warning the instant it left his lips. She raised an eyebrow, a slight smile playing on her lips. Isn't it always, especially at rush hour? She seemed to be deliberately misinterpreting his words. Was she toying with him, or was she truly oblivious? Frustrated, Ben pivoted, scanning for Doug. There he was, ambling across the street, a coffee in one hand, a newspaper tucked under his arm. Doug, the eternal optimist, the man who always saw the silver lining in every cloud. He was a sitting duck. Ben sprinted, weaving through the stalled cars. Doug, stop! He yelled, his voice hoarse. Don't cross the street. Doug turned, a puzzled expression on his face. He paused mid-stride, the corner of the newspaper flapping in the breeze. Ben, what's wrong? I'm late for? He trailed off, a flicker of confusion in his eyes, then a return to his usual good-natured smile. Relax, Ben. I've got the right of way. Ben lunged, grabbing Doug's arm, pulling him back with surprising force. Coffee sloshed over the rim of the cup, scalding Doug's hand. He yelped, dropping the newspaper. What the hell, Ben? The screech of tires, impossibly loud, tore through the air. Ben braced himself, expecting the impact, but it never came. He looked up, bewildered. The delivery truck, the one that always caused the accident, was swerving wildly, its brakes squealing, but it managed to avoid hitting Doug, and anyone else. Doug, rubbing his hand, glared at Ben. Are you crazy? You could have gotten us both killed. Ben stared at the averted disaster, his mind reeling. He'd changed something. He'd actually changed something. A surge of adrenaline, a twisted sense of hope, coursed through him. Then, the world dissolved. The sun rewound its arc, the birdsong played backwards, and the smell of burnt rubber faded, replaced by the clean, crisp air of a fresh start. At 8:02 a.m., the same car crash occurred. Again. This time, Ben stayed back. Hidden behind a parked van. He watched, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. As Sarah sketched, oblivious. He watched as Doug, newspaper and coffee in hand, stepped onto the crosswalk. This time, there was no intervention. No desperate attempt to change fate. He simply watched. The truck plowed through the intersection, the sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass echoing in the air. Sarah didn't even flinch, her hand continuing its precise, unwavering strokes. Doug never saw it coming. Ben squeezed his eyes shut, the images seared into his mind. He tasted bile, the metallic tang of fear. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand by and watch them die, over and over again. But what? He tried to warn them, he tried to stop them. Nothing worked. Or worse, when he did intervene, it only delayed the inevitable. He opened his eyes, bracing himself for the next reset. The next agonizing replay. He was just a mechanic. He fixed engines, not broken realities. Yet, staring at Sarah's serene face, at the twisted wreckage where Doug had been standing, he knew he couldn't give up. He had to find a way to break this loop, even if it broke him in the process. Whispers before the impact. The lacerating shriek of tires, a metallic scream against the morning's quiet, sliced through the air. a sound Ben recognized with growing dread. Beside the ambulance, the acrid tang of spilled fluids and singed rubber assaulted his senses. Another iteration. Another spin of the wheel. This time, his gaze bypassed the twisted metal and the paramedic's desperate dance. It locked onto Sarah Jenkins, Gary's niece. Perched atop a police vehicle, a safe remove from the chaos, she was sketching with ferocious intensity, charcoal dusting her skin. But it wasn't the art that held Ben captive. It was her mouth's subtle movements. As the sedan smashed into the delivery truck yet again, Sarah displayed no shock, no terror. She was forming words, silently shaping them. Ben scrutinized her, his mind, usually attuned to the intricacies of engines, now dissecting the delicate play of her lips. The precise utterances eluded him amidst the din of the crash, but their forms resonated. The thud reverberated. Across the square, Doug, already hobbling out of the bakery, recoiled, cradling his left arm. The cry reached Ben's ears, piercing the cacophony with crystalline clarity. "My shoulder! God, my shoulder aches!" The understanding slammed into Ben with brute force. The shapes, the silent articulations he'd observed on Sarah's face just prior to impact, they were an echo of Doug's lament. My shoulder. A phantom pang resonated in his own body, a chilling premonition interlaced with a flicker he'd thought extinguished possibility. The hope that this nightmare wasn't just a meaningless loop. The hope of structure, rationale. A hidden solution buried beneath the carnage. He forged through the gathering crowd, ignoring their perplexed stares. "Sarah!" he shouted, his voice raspy. Recognition sparked in her wide eyes as she looked up. It was more than just acknowledgement of the stranger haunting the edge of the accident scene. "What are you doing?" he demanded, striving for composure. She hesitated, clutching her notepad defensively. "Just drawing, trying to record it." "Record what, Sarah? The devastation, or something more?" He swept a hand towards the wreckage. "Tell me what you perceived, what you knew was coming." She recoiled, her eyes flitting to the paramedics battling to free the trapped driver. "I don't understand." But her tone rang hollow. "I saw you," Ben insisted, his voice lowering to a hushed intensity. "I saw you mouthing words. The very same words Doug cried out, before he even registered the pain." Sarah's eyes grew wider, stumbling backward and nearly dislodging the cup of coffee perched on the cruiser's roof. "It's just coincidence." Ben shook his head. Happenstance couldn't account for the distorted shadows, the displaced items he noticed. It couldn't explain the instinct screaming that this wasn't arbitrary. He felt, with disturbing certainty, that Sarah held a fragment of the truth. He reached out, his rough hand lightly touching her arm. "Sarah, please. If we are to break free from this, we have to comprehend. Tell me what you've perceived." Her lower lip quivered. I can't explain it myself. It's like I glimpse it before it unfolds. Fragmentary visions, sensations, utterances." "Show me your sketches," Ben pressed, his pulse quickening. "Show me everything." Conceivably, sequestered within those charcoal strokes, lay the key that unlocked the cycle. Perhaps Sarah was more than a witness. Maybe she was an oracle. And perhaps, just perhaps, they could escape the relentless repetition. The observer. The shriek of tortured metal and the tinkle of collapsing glass. A dirge Ben had come to recognize. He recoiled from the twisted metal, the gasoline fumes biting at his throat. Another iteration. Another shot at unraveling this infernal puzzle. He'd given up trying to intervene. Futile. They were phantoms reenacting their demise. But a deviation rippled through the familiar tableau. A figure stood at the periphery. Beyond the frantic dance of emergency lights. Not a rubbernecker, not a phone-wielding voyeur. Just a man in a charcoal suit, hands clasped behind him, his observation unsettlingly serene. The shadows of an ancient oak obscured his features, yet Ben felt the weight of his scrutiny, directed not at the mangled steel, but encompassing everything, as if committing the entire scene to memory. Ben's brow furrowed. A new player. He would have spotted him before, across countless repetitions. He'd become adept at cataloging the crowd, seeking any divergence, any clue. This man was indisputably out of place. He sought the gaze of a paramedic, Sarah, whose usual offering of compassion had become a small comfort. But she was absorbed, snapping commands into her radio, her concentration laser-focused on the casualties that he swept his gaze across the bystanders. They remained lost in the macabre spectacle, oblivious to the observer's presence. Ben edged forward, threading through the throng. The man remained still, unblinking. As Ben approached as he closed the distance. Details sharpened, a prominent, aquiline nose, a barely there smile etching thin lips, eyes that seemed to swallow light, leaving only shadowed depths that he possessed an almost cadaverous quality. "Excuse me," Ben's voice rasped. The man turned, his dark gaze settling on Ben without surprise or curiosity, only a disconcerting knowing. A chill snaked down Ben's spine. "Can I assist you?" the man inquired, his voice a smooth, unsettling monotone, like polished granite. "I haven't noticed you here before," Ben pressed, struggling to maintain composure. "During all this," the man's smile broadened, a cruel twist of his features. "That is because your vision lacked focus." Unease blossomed in Ben's chest. "What does that imply?" "Simply this, Mr. Carter," the man murmured, his voice barely audible. "That observation is a learned skill, not a chance occurrence." He knew his name. An impossible revelation. He hadn't exchanged more than necessary words with anyone since this torment began. He gestured towards the wreckage with a gloved hand. "Intriguing, don't you find, the recurrence?" The foregone conclusion, like a meticulously staged performance. "Who are you?" Ben demanded, his hand tightening instinctively. A dry, rustling chuckle escaped the man. "I am merely an auditor, Mr. Carter. A student of patterns. And you, I suspect, are beginning to discern them as well." He paused, his eyes boring into Ben. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, what conclusions have you drawn?" Before Ben could formulate a response, the scene fractured. Static crackled in the air. The familiar wave of nausea crashed over him. Another reset initiated. When his vision cleared, the man had vanished, gone without a trace. The crowd remained, the strobing lights pulsed, the acrid scent of spilled fuel still permeated the air. But no trace of the man in the dark suit lingered. Ben frantically scanned the faces around him, desperate for any indication that someone else had witnessed the interaction. But all were fixed on the debris, trapped within their unwitting loops. He was alone. Once more. But this time, the isolation was tinged with a chilling realization. He wasn't just imprisoned in a temporal loop. He was under surveillance. And his observer knew him by name. A suffocating dread descended, weightier than before. This wasn't some random anomaly, a cosmic quirk. This was deliberate. And he suspected the man in the charcoal suit held the solution, a solution he wasn't certain he desired, the karmic echo. Ben found Silas in the church basement, kneeling before a makeshift altar constructed from upturned milk crates and flickering candles. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood, a smell that had become intimately familiar over the past weeks. Silas didn't turn. "You," Ben said, his voice a low growl. "You're behind this, aren't you?" Silas slowly rose, his long, skeletal fingers interlocking. The candlelight cast dancing shadows on his face, exaggerating the hollows of his cheeks and the unsettling glint in his eyes. "Behind, or merely observing? A subtle distinction, wouldn't you agree?" "Cut the crap. People are dying, reliving their deaths. You're enjoying it." Ben took a step closer, his hand instinctively reaching for the wrench he carried. He stopped himself. Violence wouldn't solve this. He knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that Silas thrived on chaos. Silas tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Dying? Hardly. They are experiencing, learning, and perhaps, in some small way, contributing to the grand tapestry of existence." "Contributing to what?" "A cosmic snuff film. Tell me what this is. What's happening?" Silas sighed theatrically. "Very well. I suppose it's time for a little enlightenment. Think of it as a karmic echo, Mr. Carter. A reverberation of past actions, playing out on repeat until balance is restored." "Karmic echo? What actions? Whose actions?" Ben's frustration was a tightening coil in his chest. He wanted to grab Silas, shake him until the answers fell out, but he held back, sensing that would be exactly what Silas wanted. "Ah, now that," Silas chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Is the question, isn't it? Let's just say the town of Havenwood has a history of unresolved debts. And this loop, it's the universe's way of collecting. So we're all stuck here paying for something someone else did? That's insane. Is it? Consider the alternative. Unaccountability. The powerful preying on the weak. The sins of the fathers, forgotten. Silas spread his hands wide. This loop ensures nothing is forgotten. Every action, every consequence, played out until the lesson is learned. Ben scoffed. And you, what's your role in all this? You seem awfully comfortable watching the world burn. Silas's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed just a little too sharp. I am merely a facilitator. An observer. And perhaps a guide. I can offer you a way out. Mr. Carter. An escape from this repetitive nightmare. Ben felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by a wave of suspicion. What's the catch? Silas's eyes gleamed. Everything comes at a price, Mr. Carter. The universe demands balance. To break the loop, a sacrifice must be made. A memory, Mr. Carter. A cherished, happy memory. Give it to me, and I will sever the connection. You will be free. Ben stared at him, dumbfounded. A memory? You want me to give up a memory? Not just any memory. A joyful one. A pure one. Something that anchors you to this world, to the goodness that still exists within it. Silas's voice dripped with a kind of perverse sweetness. The more precious the memory, the more effective the severance. Ben recoiled. The idea was horrifying. To willingly erase a part of himself, a part of what made him human. No, I can't. I won't. Silas shrugged. As you wish. The loop continues. The car crashes. The blood flows. The screams repeat. He turned back to his altar, his silhouette a dark, unsettling figure against the flickering candlelight. Think about it, Mr. Carter. Eternity is a long time to spend reliving the same 5 minutes. And the offer, it remains open. Ben stood there, the scent of blood heavy in his nostrils. He closed his eyes, fighting the urge to vomit. Silas's words echoed in his head. A cherished, happy memory. What memory? And could he truly condemn himself to an eternity of this hell? Or would he surrender a piece of his soul for a chance at freedom? He knew, with sickening certainty, that Silas wouldn't make it easy. He'd pick the memory Ben could least afford to lose. The wrench felt heavy in his hand, suddenly useless. He stumbled out of the basement, the weight of the karmic echo pressing down on him, crushing him beneath the endless cycle of destruction. Echoes of the past. The library's scent, a blend of aged paper and long dormant tales, was strangely comforting to Ben. His callous thumb traced the worn binding of a Harmony Creek Herald compilation from 1938. Across the room, Mrs. Gable, the librarian whose perpetual cardigan suggested she'd materialized fully formed from a yarn catalogue, offered a knowing glance from behind thick lenses. She knew the gist of his predicament, the expurgated version he'd shared. Car trouble again, Mr. Carter? She inquired, her voice a soft gravel. He let the misnomer slide. He needed an anchor, some tangible explanation for the inexplicable. The temporal eddy he was trapped in, the peripheral shadows, Sarah's unsettling artwork. He riffled through the brittle pages, skimming headlines. Champion swine crowned at county fair, new academy welcomes students. Mundane reports that felt utterly detached from the Lovecraftian dread consuming him. Then he saw it.I in the July 14th issue, a small item on page 3. Fatal collision claims 2 at Miller's Crossing. That intersection. He hunched closer, the faded ink blurring under his touch. The article recounted a collision between a horse-drawn wagon, driven by Thomas Jenkins, and an automobile driven by Samuel Miller. Jenkins and his young daughter perished instantly. Miller, allegedly inebriated, survived unscathed. A cold wave washed over Ben, the musty air notwithstanding. Further investigation yielded follow-up pieces, the inquest, the outrage. Samuel Miller, scion of a prominent family, escaped with a wrist slap, his privilege seemingly insulating him from genuine justice. Consulting local genealogical records, the link struck him with the force of a physical blow. Sarah Jenkins. Her lineage led directly to Thomas Jenkins, the wagon driver, And Doug Miller? The same bloodline. Samuel Miller, the drunk driver, was his great-grandfather. The pieces fell into place, forming a macabre, karmic jigsaw. This wasn't a random fluke. It was an iteration, a ghastly echo of past horrors, playing out with their descendants as unwitting participants. Sarah, unknowingly gifted with foresight, sketching visions of the past, haunted by inherited trauma. Doug, affable and unburdened, unwittingly repeating his ancestors' transgression. A primal anger welled within Ben, at the uncaring cosmos, for its cruel jest, at himself, for becoming entangled in this bizarre drama. He recalled the stranger's proposition. Sacrifice his memories to sever the loop. To relinquish all that defined him, allowing the universe to correct its course, to nullify the anomaly. He closed his eyes, picturing the grime-coated engine of his truck, the satisfying heft of a wrench, sunlight on polished metal. These elements comprised his identity, the tangible and intangible achievements he'd painstakingly constructed. His memories, however flawed, were the bedrock of his being. He opened his eyes. Resolute. He would not sacrifice himself on the altar of cosmic convenience. There had to be a different path. He would defy fate. Leveraging his skills and resolve to rewrite the script, the stranger's offer smacked of insidious manipulation, a solution designed to serve someone or something else's agenda. He stood, closing the weighty volume. Mrs. Gable peered at him, her expression inquisitive. He offered a brief nod, a semblance of a smile touching his lips. "Found something," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Thanks." He exited the library, the scent of aged paper clinging to him like a shroud. The afternoon sun painted lengthy shadows as he walked toward his truck. A plan, both daring and ill-defined, was taking shape. He couldn't guarantee its success, but he knew he would no longer be a helpless bystander. He intended to shatter the cycle, regardless of the personal cost. Breaking the loop. The wrench was slick against Ben's grip. Hunched beneath the idling delivery truck, he endured its monotonous thrum. No mere observer today. He'd shatter the cursed cycle. The crucial bolt was located, prepped for calculated sabotage, loosened just enough to induce steering failure mere breaths before the intersection, enough to prevent the fatal collision, yet sparing Doug, doomed to his weekly donut pilgrimage. His actions were swift, economical, the product of relentless rehearsals. Acrid grease assaulted his nostrils. Mingled with the sting of exhaust. He could almost summon the impending sequence. The screech of tortured rubber, the violent shriek of colliding metal. No, he banished the phantom. Today, just averted disaster, the quiet triumph of a near miss. A final click sealed his work. He wiped his hands, retreating to the garage's dim recess, hard a frantic drum. He watched the truck waddle onto Main Street, Doug waving his usual cheerful salute. Ben's jaw tightened, his gaze riveted. 8:01 a.m. Sarah Jenkins' familiar sedan approached. Her countenance remained wan, etched with sorrow, but a spark ignited in her eyes this time. Hope, or anticipation's cruel twin. 8:02 a.m. The delivery truck strained towards the intersection. Ben's breath snagged. This was it. Then, a blunt thud rent the air. The front wheels bucked wildly. Doug fought the recalcitrant wheel, forcing the vehicle onto the verge. A ripple of astonished murmurs spread amongst the sparse group who usually witnessed the tragic ritual. Sarah slammed on her brakes, halting inches from the crippled truck. Shock bleaching her face. A suspended tableau of disbelief. Then, Doug emerged, shaken but intact. Sarah followed, her stare locked on the truck's mangled front. "What the?" Doug sputtered, raking his hair. Sarah, however, locked eyes with Ben, comprehension dawning. Gratitude flickered before her gaze shifted. Ben allowed himself a ghost of a smile. Complete. He'd broken it. He scanned the surroundings, half expecting Silas' incandescent wrath. But the unsettlingly serene puppet master had vanished, his terrible symphony silenced. The immediate aftermath churned. People swarmed Doug, demanding assurance of his well-being. The tow truck was summoned. The routine played out. Yet, different. A palpable tension, a sense of reality fractured. In the ensuing days, a transformation unfolded, first subtle then stark. The townspeople were plagued by strange dreams, fragments of memories, of something else. Of loops, of the endless repetition of carnage. The recollections were nebulous, elusive as smoke. Old Mrs. Higgins, the baker, obsessively lamented, "That accursed Tuesday!" Despite it now being Thursday, little Timmy Johnson perpetually drew a mangled wreck at the intersection, despite never having witnessed any such event. The town was awakening to a new dawn, an agonizing, disorienting rebirth. Ben was hailed as a hero. The man who fixed the truck, who averted catastrophe. Backslaps, free beers at the bar. He deflected the attention, racked with discomfort. He knew the truth, knew what he'd done, what he'd seen. But victory tasted like ash. The specters of the victims still haunted his sleep. The weight of the infinite loops, the ceaseless cycle of suffering, pressed down on him. He'd shattered the loop but remained chained to the memory. Free, yet shackled to the horror he escaped. The town exulted, blind to the burden he carried, the price of their restored reality. He watched them with mournful insight, wondering if the dying echoes of their shared purgatory would ever fade completely.